We're now going to switch industries a little bit, and we're going to look at also very important questions related to global e-commerce and supply chains. So really, how do we make supply chains sustainable in the age and also with the help of AI? And as we're having supply chain networks growing more and more complex continuously, and as expectations for decarbonization and other green technologies such as or practices such as circularity, as that pressure increases, you know that the foundation becomes ever more important. So how can we trust the data underneath that gives us this information? We have also three panelists that I would like to invite to join us. So first we have John Keogh. John is a professor of practice at McGill Center for Convergence of Health and Economics, also an advisor to Trace Labs. So welcome, John. Second, I'd like to invite Mary. Mary is a founder at Greenwith Studio. She is in sustainable fashion and luxury. She's a sustainable fashion and luxury, pardon my mumbling, thought leader. So I'd like to ask Mary to also join us on stage. Yeah? Okay, so in the meanwhile, as we're waiting for Mary, can I ask Ken also to join? Ken is a managing director at Virtual Partners and chair at BIManalytics, has a lot of supply chain experience, also one of our advisors. So welcome both Ken and John. And we'll give a minute or two for Mary to join, I guess, and I'll join you guys down here. She's coming? Ah, okay. Yeah, Mary, join us on stage. Maybe a round of applause for all three.
I work in fashion. I'm glad I'm keeping up the image.
Yeah. All good. Yeah. Go ahead. So thanks to all three of you for joining. So I did a very brief one-sentence introduction that I don't think does anybody justice. So maybe we spend 1 minute, just a quick round of introduction. And Mary, since you joined last, I guess you get to start.
Sure. So I'm Mary. I have a background of 25 years being across fashion and luxury. I've worked in every continent. I've worked for 11 Vogues in total, including building the first one in the Middle East, which was Turkish. I've worked in Azerbaijan, which is why I was very interested to meet Anna yesterday. And I spent a long time in Hollywood doing styling, as well as working with digital giants. Amazon, fashion, Yahoo Style. So I've kind of been across the whole kind of fashion, luxury and entertainment space for a long time, and I had a call to action, which was when I was studying Buddhism at an ashram in India. I went to go and volunteer at an animal sanctuary, and our main patient was a cow, which of course is very sacred in India, and we had to save her life because she'd ingested toxic textiles. And that day I made a firm commitment that I was never going to turn back, and I didn't know what the future held, but 5, 6, 7 years later, here I am sitting in Slovenia talking about decentralized knowledge, and that's what I put on my LinkedIn. I was like, I used to put like G-strings on actresses and sit in the front row and drink champagne and take chauffeur-driven cars and mince around like Devil Wears Prada. And here I am today, so I'm quite proud of that, and I'm very, very flattered to be here, and I've got imposter syndrome, but thank you for having me.
Happy to have you, Mary. We can't help with the G-string. We can probably do something about the champagne, but only after, so later in the program. But thanks for happy to have you here. Yeah, maybe Ken, go ahead. Love to hear from you as well.
Hi, I'm Ken. Some of you may know me. As you can tell, I'm the least fashionable person you've probably ever come across. So I'm an absolute counterpoint to Mary. I've been working. Well, obviously.
Sorry, we got two fashion icons on the stage at the moment.
John specialises in jacket selection. This particular garment originated in Dubai, not Abu Dhabi, but Dubai. Particular colour choice.
Matches my blue eyes.
Yeah. I've been working in the logistics and supply chain sector for a long time, and primarily how information systems are applied to that. Pretty much everything that we use and touch and experience in the physical world has a supply chain of some kind, and most people have no clue how complicated, complex, and how many companies are involved in the average supply chain is that most people's experience is track and trace. Where is my parcel? Why isn't it here? But it goes way, way, way beyond that. And I've spent a lifetime trying to develop and design systems that help people understand what's going on in a supply chain, where things are, what they're made from, and why you can't trust pretty much any of them, and the authorities generally don't. And I got involved with OriginTrail a while ago now, pretty much after they got going, because I thought that their technology and their approach was the most sensible solution that I'd come across to trying to address this. And I still think that. And as what's been going on here proves that. So that's me.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks for the comment on the jacket. We talked about that this morning. He was going to tell people it's from Dubai. So thank you. I've been around a while. I do a lot of digital transformation of supply ecosystems at McGill. And we also do something that relates to the conversations this morning around Society 5.0. Society 5.0 is where we put the human in the future. We look at their different roles in society, and then we try to look back and say, what do they need? How do we need to evolve towards that? But I do want to tell one little story to link to Bob. So back in the 80s and 90s, I was working at Digital Equipment Corporation, responsible for the networking supply chain. And one of my jobs was to go to the Bay Area to integrate small startup companies into the digital equipment portfolio. If I could spell stock, I would not be here today, because one of those companies that I had to teach how to do part numbering and product lifecycle management was a small startup called Cisco. And then we had Cabletron, Wellfleet, Synoptics, and all of the Chipcom and all of those, Bob. So we did put Cabletron equipment into the Kremlin, and allegedly, I have to say that, allegedly we got paid in vodka and white stallions through the Middle East or something like that, but allegedly.
Thanks for the introductions, everyone. That's yeah. I hope you would still be here, John. I don't know, even if you could spell stock, but that's a different question. I would like to start with a similar approach as we did in the previous panel. So there is a lot of talk about AI bringing potential to sustainability, to bring sustainability to supply chains, and what does that look like in practice for you? So what is that foundation of trust? Because trust is the key word here, right? It's very easy to say this is sustainable, it's coming from here and here and here, but how does that foundation where we can trust what we see look like? What is needed? And I think it's each of you have a very unique perspective. Would love to hear this from you. Yeah, Mary, you can go first, I guess. We go in a row.
All right, I'm going to gamify this. It's nearly lunchtime, so let's think about this. Okay, so your jacket's from Dubai, right? Who else in this room knows the origin of their clothing that's on their body? Okay, there's someone at the back. Okay, how do you know that? Oh, okay, you know what? Let's change places. Okay, I know where these trousers came from because they've got what's called a digital product passport. Does everybody know about those? I don't want to teach everyone to suck eggs. Okay, digital product passports, EU mandatory legislation, QR code, RFID chip or NFC chip, product passport. Where's it come from? Who made it? What's it made from? Where? What logistics? What packaging? What happened up until point of sale? And hopefully also embedding in the circularity and stewardship piece, which is use phase, end of life, right? So it's iterative and they're still quite early. But my trousers have a digital product passport. My shirt here, I knew full well that I was buying something rubbish, okay? I have no idea. I can look at the label. Only about 80% of labeling is correct anyway. My jacket, I bought it secondhand. I love it. I know nothing. Okay, do you know much about your jacket, apart from Dubai?
It's from Dubai.
I bought two more.
Or two more? Okay. Okay, we'll come with judgment later. But the point is that trust is the greatest commodity in supply chains for manufactured goods, especially for consumer goods, right? Whether it's FMCG right up to high fashion or anything. Now, the reason why I'm also here, I've been joking about, underwear and things, but one of the reasons why I'm here is we are in early development on a piece of proprietary software that's a bit like Trustpilot or Rotten Tomatoes for consumers to understand not only whether something is sustainable or not, but we're taking a very different lens on it. And I go back to the G-string, I'm afraid, because in relation to a film I've been very honoured to work on, which was a James Cameron-backed documentary that's coming out next year. It's about textile toxicity, and there's an untold story about the fact, because our skin, and Tim, who was on the earlier panel, will know a lot about this, our skin is permeable, it's a membrane, it's our largest adaptive immune system. And only 80 out of about the 14,000 synthetic chemicals used in global textile manufacturing have been health and safety tested. That's a quarter of the world's chemical output. And so consumers wanting sustainability, 90% of Gen Z don't trust what a brand says on sustainability. But when they find out that only 2% of the health and safety has been done, the stuff that sits closest to your body, right, hence the G-string, is everything, whether it's your athleisure clothes, whether it's a shirt you're wearing under your suit, whether it's your uniform if you work in a place where you have to wear a uniform, if you're a child who wears a uniform to school. This is a public health crisis. It's not a sustainability crisis. It's not a fashion crisis. It's not even a textiles crisis. It's a public health crisis affecting maybe 7.5, 8 billion people every day without them knowing it. And there's a connection between the rise in, I'm afraid to say, impotence, testicular cancer, breast cancer, autoimmune, and textiles. So building trust with AI, when you look at fashion and textiles, and we could include medical textiles into that as well, when you want to talk about trust, this will be a huge mandate. But I'd just like to add to that, back to my point about India, is that when I was studying there, something I thought a lot about AI is, my mentor and teacher was called Geshe Dorji Damjul, and he was the right hand of the Dalai Lama, His Holiness. And he taught us, and me in my sessions, that the mind is like a tool, and our ego and our mind are one and the same, and we can't identify with our mind because it's a bit like a set of radio channels that are just constantly going, and one has to stand a bit like standing on a train station and watching the trains come past when we're watching our thoughts. And the minute people start to identify with their thoughts, that's when we get into really crazy behaviors, right? And if you look at what happened in AI, a lot of the, let's say recent suicides and things were because people started to identify with the machine in the same way that the Buddhists say, do not identify with the white noise in your brain. And people started to identify with those chatbots, right? And we've seen what some of those consequences are. So I think trust in AI, whether you're talking about the textile issue I talked about, or even down to how do you treat AI like you should with a Buddhist framework on it? And how do you know if you're using an AI tool, whether you're someone and putting supply chain data in, someone that you guys probably work with, or whether you're a consumer or a BIFA waste management people, you might also want to think about, like, is this AI based in Ashburn? Like, do those machines make those screaming noises? Like, how much is they using a closed loop system for their water and their chemicals and their heating in those facilities? Like, that's trust. I want to trust that, like, just using the AI tool, whether I'm a consumer or I'm in trade, is carrying those vast amounts of emissions or not. So there's a lot to tackle there, but I'll stop talking.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Having AI helping supply chains be more sustainable, but at the same time ruining sustainability because it's running. It's a very it's an interesting point.
Of AI, yeah.
But it's a valid point. Yeah. So Ken, John, what are your thoughts on what does this look like in practice for you?
Trust and transparency in supply chains has been a holy grail for all the time I've been playing around in it, which goes back, 40 odd years plus. If supply chains were trusted and were transparent, stuff would always arrive on time. There would never be any problems. Trouble is, you've got a number of vested interests in there. As Kim mentioned earlier, corporations have a vested interest in keeping things quiet, if you will. There's also bad actors that exploit global supply chains to move products around for terrorism or whatever. They have a vested interest in misdescribing and misdeclaring what's moved through supply chains. An example I cited last year related to the Ever Given when it decided to nudge the banks of the Suez Canal. The protocol now for pretty much every port is if there's an event that happens with a container ship, and some of people don't understand the scale of these things unless they see them up close. The biggest container ships now have something like 24,000 20-foot containers on them. A combined cargo and hull value is well over $2 billion. So if one of these things goes wrong, that's a lot that happens. You would think that because there are manifests related to all of the components and the containers on a vessel, those manifests are never trusted, ever, irrespective of what the manufacturers say, irrespective of all the data that you say relates to those. they never, ever, ever trust them because they've learned that they cannot be trusted. So, for example, when the baby container ship bumped into the bridge in Baltimore earlier this year, and sadly the bridge collapsed and lives were lost in that, the Port Authority declared an emergency because they couldn't trust the manifest that was on that ship. They didn't know if it was going to explode or anything like that. And that's true in every major port and a lot of the minor ones around the world, that something happens, there's a full court press called, fire, health, everybody turns up. They look at the manifest, they say, yeah, you know, do we trust this? No, we treat it as a guide. If you had trust and transparency throughout a supply chain, throughout manufacturing processes, a lot of this would not be necessary. But there are a number of actors involved in global supply chain operations that have a vested interest in either not providing transparency or misdeclaring things for nefarious activities. DKG and the work that OriginTrail have been doing, working with various other technology companies, a lot of the information systems providers, if you're able to clean the data and then verify it, that would address a lot of this. But the political ramifications surrounding a lot of this make it a very, very, very hard sell. Absolutely, should we push to try and make this happen? Yes. Is it likely to happen in the short term? No. But I'm always an optimist.
So after having researched transparency and trust over the last 15 years, I'm going to take a different approach to answering the question. And I'm going to take a supply chain approach. And I may be the only management science researcher here, so forgive me. But what I would suggest is when we get through, even when you're thinking about the questions, to ask, is there a theoretical basis for this? So let me give you an example. If I wanted to look at applying AI in the supply chain, I would start at the beginning. I would start at the supplier, and then I would think, okay, so what theoretical frameworks helps me to understand the power imbalances, the information asymmetry. Information asymmetry is when one party has more information than the other, or even behavior. So when we look at those, we actually have solid theoretical frameworks that have helped us for decades. So for example, transaction cost economics. Transactions is the core element of that, but it also talks about opportunism and cheating, self-interest seeking with guile. So when you break that into, let's say, the food industry, you have not only food fraud, but food crime. Food crime is different because it also involves organized crime. So how can you apply AI there? But on signaling theory is it comes from the job markets where you signal your capabilities through either you have a PhD, you have a master's, and so on. But when you apply it to the food chain, it helps us to understand the behavior of suppliers when they're signaling their capabilities. And if they're signaling their capabilities, how can you verify that? How can you verify that they're certified, they have an ISO certification? How can you verify their claims that they have 400 engineers, X amount of fancy technology, and they can do all of these things at this production level? So transaction cost economics also helps us by looking at the ex-post activities that go on and the cheating that goes on between suppliers. I've just finished research on opportunism in food chains and how suppliers cheat their buyers, and it's nasty out there. Believe me, it's nasty out there. If we look at the counter to, now I'm the buyer and I'm buying from someone who's signaling their capabilities, most of those signals coming out are unverified. Hence, your technology is very powerful to be able to cut down on the transaction costs to verify all of that information. And then you look at screening theory. Screening theory is where the buyer takes the first step to set up that. And I'll simplify this by saying, did you ever buy like a healthcare policy, car insurance, or dental, where you self-select your level of risk? You say, oh, I want level 3 with all of these features. So in screening theory, and I'm probably one of the first researchers to apply screening theory to the food industry to look at how we can set up AI-based and other technologies and tools so that the buyer can ignore the signals and set up their own screening, and a lot of that can be AI-based as well. So I'll stop at that, but I would just encourage you to think about, are there existing theories that can help you argue the points around the benefits of the technology in DKGs? And I can tell you right now, there are a significant amount of high-value stuff out there.
Thanks, John, and then Ken and Mary. I think very different answers. Not at all what I was expecting, but very, very interesting answers. And if I then take, if we move like one step back and say, okay, we have challenges with people wanting to be obscure. We have political, let's say, obstacles. But taking all this aside, right? If we do, and in certain cases we have seen progress, quite a bit of progress to also from OriginTrail and TraceLab's perspective, where we were able to implement things that created transparency that wasn't there before and that improved the, that part of the, or that particular supply chain. What are the, what is the potential? Let's say now we have all of these data that you mentioned also, John, we have all of this connected between all of the different parties, right? Where, if we have that level of trust, right, where can then artificial intelligence, neurosymbolic one, DKG, LLMs, what we discussed before, where can this take us? Where could supply chains really become a lot more sustainable? In what ways are we talking about here? Are we talking about production? Are we talking about logistics? Are we talking about something entirely different? Where do you see this impact having the, well, this having the largest impact, because that's also probably where we should focus on getting it done first, right?
You get colossal gains in efficiency. Things would arrive faster. Things that needn't arrive, just won't happen. You could reduce the amount of product that's ordered just in case. The efficiencies and the ability for people to predict what they're doing right across the piece, it would be phenomenal transformation.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
I think there's two ways that, again, I think I said earlier, like, I don't think, and John and I were talking about this as well earlier, which is, I don't think with manufactured goods, where they are, particularly when they're consumer facing, but not always, that they should be looked at as supply chain being something that only happens in the upstream, right? Because we have these huge waste problems. In my industry, fashion, we only recycle 2-3% of the waste, and what happens to it is like a garbage truck every second roughly is going to waste or incineration. And so imagine, like, since we've been on the stage, how many seconds that is. It's crazy. 13 times 60, whatever it is. So the efficiencies, to Ken's point, would certainly help in the waste side of it all. But the piece I think that is really overlooked is the consumer piece, right? Because if the supply chain is the whole life cycle, then at some point on the mid and downstream is the consumer or the other use phase. And the consumer is being so overlooked in all of this. There was a piece recently in some of our industry press called "Supply Chain is the New Status Symbol." And if the consumer is then given a role to play in driving forward what happens in the upstream, and is able to take shared responsibility and is able to put their own data on the DKG and is also able to determine, with data being fed back through it into the brand, into the manufacturers, into the retailers and all of that, then you start to build up this ecosystem that's in touch with each other. And frankly, all of these efforts to bring about efficiencies and better supply chains, be more sustainable, whether it's for compliance or commercial or both, whatever, risk or reward reasons, all of them are futile if they're not getting consumer engagement, or customer, whatever your customer or consumer is. Because if they're not buying it, then you're not seeing it on the bottom line anyway. So one of the roles I do is as an exec fellow at King's College, and we work a lot with their student cohorts to survey them and discuss with them what they would want from a tool like our one. And they all feel woefully neglected, and they feel their voice is not heard, and they want to take control, and they want to feel that they are a co-custodian, just like you do with an Apple product. You feel like you're a co-custodian with Apple, and that's the future. So that's where I think it's instrumental.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And your Paranet thing, right?
Yeah, I'll come back to have a follow-up question on that, but I'd love to hear from John first.
So, you both answered that quite sufficiently, and so there's not a lot I can add to that, but I will give a different spin again. So let me just address trust, and if you're putting in AI, you're using blockchain as the base layer, right? We know that immutability is a key selling feature, but we also know that supply chains are imperfect, and we also know that some supply chains are not suitable for a blockchain because of that imperfect nature of them. Now, you can address that, of course, by fixing the data, And we know that strategy, the digitization before the digitalization, the business process and role automation. So blockchain should come after the data is fixed. And we know and the OriginTrail team has been dealing with that for quite some time. But trust is what's often called a potpourri of different concepts. There's more than 140 different definitions, so we need to be very clear on what kind of trust. If we look at it from, if the four of us are sitting at a table in a restaurant, then the trust is about a vulnerability, that we accept the vulnerability that everyone in the supply chain, from the farmer to the distribution to the processing to the people in the kitchen, that they had our best interests at heart when they were doing it. So we need to be very clear on the type of trust, and then we look back into the theory and we can go, oh, here are different ways to understand trust, and then we can apply that to the concepts, the technologies that we're trying to put forward. My biggest concern, to be quite honest, is when we look at, and I brought this up, Giga and Thomas, Branimir have heard me talk about this before. Opportunism, again, think of transaction cost economics. It defines what opportunism is, self-interest seeking beguile. Think about cheating, lying, stealing, and all that sort of stuff. Even not disclosing information or disclosing incorrect information. And we've seen some companies that went out of business because of that, some big companies like WorldCom and others in the past. They disclosed information, they were transparent, but they were transparent with incorrect, deliberately incorrect information. So my concern is that when you have bad data going into a blockchain, you have what's called immutable lies. So when you have immutable lies going in there, what you're actually doing from a theoretical perspective is you're automating opportunism. So we have to find ways of how can we address that, how can we use AI to be able to identify the anomalies in our data so that we're not automating opportunism.
And maybe just a quick follow-up on that, John. I know you did some research on what is currently being in focus of researchers on the sustainability topic. Do you see already any results from AI actually being able to do this, right? So to make sure that false or made up or wrong data is identified earlier before it ends up in the, for example, decentralized systems like the decentralized knowledge graph, because then that kind of ties everything together. If we can get there, right, to help us identify those sooner, we get the graph that is much better. We can go to Ken's scenario if everybody gets their Christmas presents in time and everybody knows what's going on at all points. So is that something that we're already seeing happening? Because that's the underlying issue, right? It's like we have some Excels there, some bills of lading in paper form.
Yep.
Is that happening already?
It's happening in different forms. And I'll give one simple example just to ground the point I make. USDA organic. As consumers, we place our trust in that because it implies that the government were involved. So it has a strong trust signal. Other new claims that come out have a weaker signal. So when it has that very strong signal, what does the industry do? The theory says that companies will not fake it, but if you look at the USDA organic website, they will list, when I last looked, it was 176 companies that were falsely claiming to be USDA organic. And that's all over the world. The highest volume of that in the 30s is in the US, the second highest is in China. So when I talk to CEOs, I say, where do you distribute your products to? And then I'm provocative. And I go, did you know you ship to the UK, to Tesco? It's halal. Did you know that 10% of your products are counterfeited in the UK? And then they go, how do you know that, John? And I go, how do you know they're not? And the how do you know they're not is a serious thing, because if they're not doing market surveillance, they will never know. And the same with USDA organic. If you're not doing market surveillance in China, you will never know that if there's fake products on the market. So that's one simple example where consumers are being taken advantage of, where AI can actually do some testing and look at what's on their website, how are they claiming it, and going back to the authoritative source to verify that they have that certification.
You really nicely tied. I think this is what you wanted to probably touch upon, Mary, right? Because this is a very similar case that we discussed for fashion, right?
Yeah, fashion and also other consumer goods. I mean, if you look at recently, there's been people buying these hair tongs that were like fake Dysons that have exploded and caught on fire. So whether it's whoever your customer is, whether it's trade or it's an adjacent sector that's B2B or it's end user consumer, there's a thing I cautioned against, that kind of, let's not fetishize AI, right, until we can trust the AI itself and its emissions is good. But there's a fetishization of data today, right? And I think consumers are also fed up of being, on a basic level, asked to click for the cookies when all they want is to try and find something. They're fed up of finding that their social feeds are full of, listening to them and regurgitating. They just know they're being surveilled and scraped. And the idea that data is king is not. I think the point is that data and the trust that goes with it is only effective if it's seen as a means, not an end of itself. So the idea is, how do you translate data, blockchain, neural knowledge graphs, whatever you're doing, how do you translate that into a format and a system that is useful to those that benefit? So if it's the restaurant or Tesco and halal, doesn't matter if it's packaging or it's, the manifest of the shipping. How do you translate that into for all the different stakeholders to use it in a way that's effective and it lands and is sticky? Because otherwise, it's just an exercise, and it's a futile exercise. And look at how clever we all are, and it's like solutions still looking for the problem, kind of, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a very. I mean, it goes back into how this decentralization, especially from a consumer angle, then actually can help address at least parts of this, not only from a consumer angle, but also from at least starting with certification bodies, things that are pretty direct, right? If you have those things in the graph, you can build on top and add data as you go and start building that trust, which my conclusion from this discussion is that is not, there's not like a silver bullet for this, right? It's, you need to target specific areas of supply chain, build trust there, build graphs that you can then use to increase confidence of consumers, to make sure that manifests are not faked, and then tackle that. So different areas with different levels of impact. I think consumers, I agree with you here, should also be the driving force, and I think the technology somehow also needs to enable that, and that's part of what we discussed.
Whether it's agentic
Can I add a small point to this?
Absolutely.
Because I think this is really important, and I do apologize for jumping in on this, but I typically advise intergovernmental agencies, NGOs, and some of the big guys, not individual companies and so on. But at APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Collaboration, it's the 21 economies that touch the Pacific. One of the projects that was on peripheral to me looked at bringing a single ingredient product to market. It was wine from Chile. And when they analyzed the business processes, they found 70. That's shocking, right? So 20 of those services, those processes were done internally, 21 were semi-outsourced, and 29 were fully outsourced. Think this is where we need to get to. We need to get that on a knowledge graph, because we forget. We only think about the physical product, but we have to think about the agronomist who touched that product. Was he licensed? What's his verifiable identity? What product did he use? Was that product verified for that country? Was it safe? Was he trained? Was he licensed? And all of those 70 services need to end up in a knowledge graph for us to be successful. Yep. Think broader than the product. Think into the services.
I think that ties in very nicely. Sorry, Ken, just like one sentence, what Noemi said before. Context, right? You need context, not just this bottle was transported here. Yeah. The richer you have, the context you have, the more conclusions you can make, right? Sorry, Ken, go ahead. I think we have 2 minutes.
I was just going to say, context is absolutely vital, but that example is across every aspect of manufacturing, supply chains, manufacturing processes.
Ken, maybe just take microphone.
Fabric quota, collection and allocation and so on, right across the piece. And as you start joining those dots more and more and more, it's very hard at the start, but over time, that becomes such a solid, trusted, verifiable body of information that it will transform everything. But it's going to take a while.
Can I?
That's we have 1 minute. I would like to open, if it's very quick, Mary, because I would like to open also if there's any questions.
I think the other thing, the role to play in the use of this data, if we're talking about who can use it, not just the consumer or if it's a customer who might be within your trade. But we know that in the same way that in AI is impossible to regulate, it's impossible to regulate criminal activity in a manifest. It's impossible to regulate the chemicals used in textiles. This data would be essentially helpful to help drive compliance and to feed back to the regulators, because essentially you're doing your job for them. They're doing their job for them. You see what I mean? So there's a role to play, as long as it's obviously done in the right way. But it will certainly eliminate that kind of, they have to try and constantly catch up with the bad, let's say the bad guys,
Yeah,
It's
and
show,
that's
don't
where
tell,
I
right?
think decentralization can play a large role. And going back to the consumers, right? Consumers in this case are decentralization because they're the end users of all of the products that we have, right? It's nothing is done B2B for the. It
Not in a
always ends up,
circular economy, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have 35 seconds left on the timer, but I would like to open up if there are any questions from the crowd that we can quickly take. Raise your hand.
They're all
If
hungry.
not,
They're hungry.
yeah, so they're hungry. Yeah, so that's the downside of having a session before lunch break. But I think so. We're all here. We're happy to discuss also in the break. If you have any questions, so you guys are all still around, right, for the next couple of hours. Thank you all for joining. I think that was a very also similar to the previous panel. I love how different backgrounds and different views you guys have on this, but. Also, I think good conclusions, and I think we're already making some progress in that direction, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So thank you all for joining, and
thank you for having us.